In this After Effects tutorial, I'll explain some of the techniques you need to learn if you want to create SaaS-style animations or explainer videos, like the ones you can see on the Zelios channel. So, if you're interested in learning and improving your motion graphics skills, this class is for you because I'm going to explain everything step by step. This is an example of what we'll learn. If you'd like to support the channel, in addition to your likes, you can also become a member of the Motion Graphics Zone on Patreon. There I share all the projects and materials I use in my tutorials, among other things, so you can continue practicing and improving your motion design skills. I've included the link in the description if you'd like to check it out. The first thing I'll do is import all the files and save them in a folder to keep everything organized. Now I'm going to create a composition called Placeholder, 1080 by 1350 pixels, with 30 frames per second and a duration of 20 seconds. Using the rectangle tool, we'll create a shape like this, rename it, center the anchor point, and center it in the viewport. We'll disable this chain so we can modify the values separately and set the dimensions to these, so it's not the same size as the composition, leaving some empty space around it. We'll also round the corners, setting them to 100, for example. With the Alt key pressed, we'll click on the fill to change it to gradient fill, and we'll position the gradient handles like this. The gradient might appear like this by default, but now we'll see how to edit it to use the colors we want. I'm going to use this color palette I have here in the assets. By the way, if you like documentary-style editing, my course is now available. But it's not just a course in which I show you how to animate a sequence in After Effects and that's it, but I show you the entire procedure that I followed to create this animation. From the initial idea to the final render, going through each and every phase of the creative process. I'll leave the link in the description in case you want to take a look. Okay, let's go back to the gradient, and with the eyedropper tool, we'll start adding the colors we've chosen. To add a new color, we click below this bar. I like it this way. Anyway, we can come back and change the colors at any time. We duplicate the layer and rename it Stroke. We're going to remove the gradient from this layer and add a gradient stroke. We also need to position the handles. Look, there's a question mark here. That's because this layer contains another stroke, and After Effects doesn't know which one to display, so we delete this one, and that's it. For now, I'm going to increase the thickness quite a bit to see it better, and I'm going to use the same palette to choose the colors. So far, so good. I'm going to leave the stroke thickness at 10 pixels. We select the rectangle tool again, remove the stroke, and activate the gradient. Now we create a shape like this, center the anchor point, and center it in the viewport. I'm not going to change the colors. I'll use the same ones. I'm only going to move the handles. And maybe round the corners a little too. 50 seems fine to me. We select the text tool, create a box like this, and type the paragraph. If we press the Control key, it snaps precisely to the center of this shape. If you want, you can try the different blending modes to see if you like any of them. I'm going to leave it on Overlay. I'm going to parent the text to the shape. The font I'm using is called Cool Vetica in its light version, and these are the parameters for the text layer, in case you want to use the same ones. Now we're going to create an ellipse with the same gradient, and we're only going to adjust the handles. We're going to duplicate this layer, and the copy will be called Stroke. We'll remove the gradient and add a stroke. Although we already had one, so we'll delete this one. I'll set the thickness to 4 pixels. And for the color, I'll select this one I have here in the color palette. We'll parent the stroke to the ellipse and position all the layers. We can use the proportionality grid to help keep everything more or less centered. To finish the design of this composition, we're going to add one of these icons that you'll find in the Project Files assets. We'll center it and adjust its scale. We'll apply a fill effect with the same color as the stroke. We'll make this layer a guide layer so that it's only visible in this composition and not in others. And we can also deactivate it if we want. Oh, one more thing. We're going to add a little glow to this stroke. I'm going to use the Deep Glow plugin. It's a paid plugin that works very well, but it doesn't come with After Effects by default. I'm going to lower the radius and intensity a bit. If you don't have this plugin installed, you can use the glow effect and increase the radius slightly. It actually looks really good that way too. We'll put the layer in Add mode, and that's it. The design for this composition is finished. This is the one I made. It's very basic, but you can add more details and elements if you want. This composition will be called Carousel 1920 by 1080, and we'll leave everything else as is. We'll bring the placeholder here, scale it to 55%, and convert the composition to 3D. I'm going to activate two views to better see what we're doing. With the Pan Behind tool, we can move the composition's anchor point. And if we hold down the Control key, it will adjust automatically. Now, we'll set the rotation on the y-axis to minus 120 degrees. Basically, what I want to do is create a hexagon with these compositions. We'll duplicate the composition again, set the anchor point there, and the rotation to minus 240 degrees. We'll do this with the rest of the compositions, with a 120-degree difference between them, so that we end up with a perfect hexagon. There we have it. With all the layers selected, we'll press Ctrl plus Alt plus Home to center the anchor point. We create a null object, convert it to 3D, and the idea is to place it here in the center of the compositions. So I'm going to put a guideline right here where these two vertices meet. Okay, now we move the null object along the z-axis until it's positioned on the guideline. We select all the compositions and parent them to the null object, expand the rotation options, and set a keyframe for X and Y rotation. Now we move to the 6-second mark, and here we'll set these values. 360 degrees in Y, so it makes a full rotation, and 25 degrees in X to get this perspective. I think I'll scale it down a bit. I'll leave it at 80%. I like it better there. We smooth the keyframes and set the influence on the handles to around 70%. I see that some compositions are upside down, but we can easily fix that. We expand the rotation options and set it to 180 degrees. We do the same for this one. And for this one too. Let's do a preview to make sure everything is working correctly. Next, we'll animate the curvature of these compositions so they don't look so straight. We have the geometry options disabled. So let's change the render engine to Advanced 3D. Now we can modify the curvature. To make the arc smoother, we can increase the number of segments. Let's set it to 20, for example. And for now, I'll leave the curvature at 0. If you like how these shadows look, you can leave them as is. But I'm going to add an ambient light with an intensity of 100. Go to the beginning of the timeline, select all the compositions, and type curvature here. Now, mark a keyframe for each one. Move 25 frames forward and set the curvature to -40. And that's how we get this animation. We select them all again and set the segments to 20, so the arc looks smoother. There it is, perfect. We smooth all the keyframes and move these handles all the way to the left. We're also going to add a small rotation animation to these two compositions. We mark a keyframe on the y-axis. Move 25 frames forward and place the keyframes there. Now, at the beginning of the timeline, we're going to orient the compositions horizontally. We also smooth these keyframes and give the curve the same shape. Okay, this looks perfect. We're going to lower the opacity of the compositions a little so we can see through them, as if they were made of glass or something. But just a tiny bit. I think at 98% it looks pretty good. To avoid having the same icon in all the compositions, we need to duplicate them from the project panel and replace them. We're going to create a new folder and put the placeholders in it. We need to make 5 more copies. Now, let's select this composition, for example, and in the project panel, hold down the Alt key and release it to replace this copy. We do the same with the others. Okay, now we can go one by one, changing the icons or elements we want. We select the icon, and just like before, press the Alt key to replace it. And if necessary, we adjust its scale a bit. There, we can see how the icon has changed. We have to do this with the rest of the compositions. Obviously, you can also change the body text if you want. I think this would be the last one. We close these compositions and preview them to check that everything works correctly. In this composition, we're going to create the star that will serve as the transition between the two scenes. We'll leave everything as is. Right-click and create a shape layer, adding a polystar and a fill, in this case, white. Now, let's make some adjustments to the properties of this shape. We'll leave the type as star. Here we can add any number of points we want. I'm going to make it 4-pointed. I'll leave the inner radius at 30 and the outer radius at 80. I'll set the inner roundness to 200%. And to make the points look a bit rounded, I'll increase this value to 10%. Perfect. We have our star. Now we're going to convert it to 3D and make sure we have the classic 3D render engine activated. At the beginning of the timeline, we'll mark one keyframe for position and another for Z rotation. If we press the U key twice, it will show us all the keyframes. I'm going to activate two views to see it better. I'll put this viewfinder in top view. Now I'm going to move the star forward on the Z axis until it fills the entire composition. I'll set the Z-axis value to -2,595 and the rotation to -45 degrees. Now we move forward to 110 and continue animating the Z-axis. Here, I'll set the rotation to 90 degrees and the Z-axis value to -2,140. In this first keyframe, I might move the star slightly to the left until it's right up against the edge of the composition, just before the background appears. We move forward to the 3-second mark and continue animating. I'll set the Z-axis value to 0 and the rotation to 270 degrees. This is where the text will go, so we'll move the star slightly to the left on the X-axis and set the X-axis value to 555. Now, we need to give the animation some flow, because look how bad it looks. To begin, We're going to add a bit of curve to the trajectory. Select the Convert Vertex tool, and if you drag this point, these handles will appear. We'll position this one roughly here to make the star's trajectory more organic. We'll smooth all these keyframes, and now we need to work with the animation curve so the star's movement is continuous and doesn't stop when it reaches these keyframes. Let's start with the position handles. If the curves aren't visible, you need to switch to Edit Speed Graph. Set the influence of this handle to 70%. Set this other one to 50%. To make the animation end very smoothly, we'll set the influence of this one to 90%. To prevent the star from stopping when it reaches this point, we need to modify the entry and exit speeds. Double-click on this point and activate the Continuous option. This will allow us to move the handles as if they were a single unit. Look, if we move them up a little, it'll look much better now. Well, although we still need to adjust the rotation values. Here, we'll set the exact value. I think 500 will look great. Now let's work on the rotation curve. We'll set the influence of this handle to 100%. This other one to 50. And to make the animation end very smoothly, we'll set this one to 90. We also need to adjust the entry and exit speeds so the movement is smooth and constant and never stops. We'll do the same as before. Lock these two handles and move them up a little. The difference between how it looked before and how it looks now is incredible. The animation looks very fluid, and the star never stops, which is exactly the effect we wanted to achieve. We'll set the exact value. I think 70 is fine, and the same for this handle. And we already have the star ready. That will help us make the transition between both scenes. Now, we're going to create a composition called montage. We won't change anything here. We'll leave it as is. Right-click and create a solid that will serve as the background. We'll apply a 4-color gradient effect to this solid. To change the colors, we'll bring back the palette we're using. This effect has 4 handles, each corresponding to a color. Okay, now I'll use the eyedropper tool to color the background. That should do the trick. With the pen tool, we'll create a shape like this. We'll apply a fastbox blur effect and increase the blur quite a bit. Around 150 is good. You can experiment with different blending modes. For now, I'll leave it on screen. I'm going to continue adding elements, now this footage, containing some suspended particles. We'll adjust the scale, and we'll make these particles alpha mats of the light beam we created earlier. So they're only visible in this area. We need to make this layer visible again, and we'll change the blending mode of the particles. If you want, you can adjust the shape of this layer. It looks perfect there. Now I'm going to add this other video where something like sunbeams appear. I'm going to reduce its scale a bit and set this layer to screen blending mode. I might also lower its opacity a little. We've ended up with a really cool background. It looks like we're underwater. Now we can bring in the compositions, starting with the carousel. We go to the 3-second mark, bring in the star composition, and position it to start right here. We cut the carousel composition right here at this point, and we'll make this cut portion the alpha mat of the star. You can already start to see the effect, but we need to make some adjustments. We duplicate the star composition, make it visible again, and add a small animation to the opacity. Around this point, we mark a keyframe with 0 opacity. Move forward a bit and set its opacity to 100%. We'll also animate the opacity of this one. We move forward a bit and mark another keyframe with 100 opacity. And a little further on, we set it to 0. We smooth these two keyframes with F9. To continue seeing the carousel here, we'll place these two compositions at the very top. Wow, this looks amazing. To prevent the particles from being visible in the next scene, we'll add a small opacity animation. We mark a keyframe here at the beginning of the layer, and a little further on, around here, we set its opacity to 0. Let's preview the animation to see how it's looking. Okay, let's continue. We're going to convert these two-star compositions to 3D, and with a right click, we'll create a 35mm camera with one node. We'll also create a null object, convert it to 3D, and parent the camera to it. Before animating the camera, we'll add some other elements. For example, a solid that will serve as the background for the second scene. We'll apply a gradient ramp effect to this layer. We'll cut this layer right here at this point, which, by the way, I'm going to mark and rename Transition. For the background colors, I'll use the color palette. To prevent it from appearing abruptly, we need to make this layer the alpha matte of the star. But in this case, we need to invert the alpha matte by checking this box. Now it looks perfect. Now we're going to write some text. Convert it to 3D, center its anchor point, and center it in the viewport as well. I'm going to make it a little bigger and move it slightly to the right. The font I'm using is called Vastago Grotesque, but you can use whichever one you like best. We're going to add a small animation to the text. We'll add the position property and the opacity property. We'll move it down a bit and set the opacity to 0. In the range selector, we'll select a keyframe and offset and set it to -100, and then a little further down, we'll set this value to 100. The animation isn't very clear right now because we need to make some adjustments. Here in Advanced, we'll change from square to ramp up. We'll set the ease high to 20 and the ease low to 100. Now it looks great. The only thing left is to adjust the timing. I want the text to appear more or less around this area. I like it quite well there. We'll cut that text layer where we have the marker and move it down here. We duplicate the background layer and rename the copy Grid, convert it to 3D, and apply the same effect. We can remove the gradient. Here we switch to the width slider and significantly increase its value. We set this layer to overlay mode. And I'll leave the grid thickness at 2 for a very subtle effect. To make the parallax effect between the text and the grid more noticeable, we need to move it backward on the z-axis. For example, 1,000 pixels. Now we need to adjust the scale. While here at the marker, we'll create a small animation of the null that controls the camera. Right here, we mark a keyframe. And at 11:10, we'll move the camera backward. We set the value to -300, and with F9, we smooth the keyframes. This way, when the star animation ends, the camera is still moving backward, giving the scene much more dynamism. I also want this layer of rays to be visible in the second scene, so I'm going to put it up here. Let's do a preview to see what else we need to do. Let's create a solid called Shine and give it this blue color. Now, with the pen tool, let's make a mask like this. It doesn't need to be perfect, but it should have a shape similar to this, as if the light beam were coming from above. We'll apply the Fastbox blur effect to this solid. We'll increase the value to about 100 and set the layer to screen mode. We'll place it below the star composition and, if necessary, adjust the mask a bit. Now we'll go to the last keyframe and convert the layer to 3D. adjusting the scale so it fills the entire composition. We'll cut the layer at this point, and now we'll add a small animation to the mask's expansion. We'll go to 325 and select a keyframe, move it slightly to the right, and without moving from here, we'll adjust this value until the light beam is no longer visible. We place this keyframe here, smooth it with F9, and refine the curve a bit. This gives us this animation. Okay, let's continue. With the ellipse tool, we'll create one like this. Holding down the Shift key, we draw a perfect circle. We rename the layer, convert it to 3D, center the anchor point, and, while on the last keyframe, center it in view. We need to set this layer to the same depth on the Z-axis as the layer called Shine. If the Shine layer has a value of 0, we'll also set the circle layer to 0. We'll also clip it here. If this shape has a solid color, you need to change it to a radial gradient and position the handles like this. Now we're going to move the shape down on the Y-axis. We set the stroke to 0, and also add a small animation to its position. Around this area, we'll mark a keyframe. In this section, we mark another one. And now in the first one, we move the ellipse down on the Y-axis. We smooth the keyframes and give the curve the shape. We're going to duplicate this shape to create another glow, rename the layer, and remove the fill, leaving only the stroke with a thickness of approximately 40 pixels. We'll also add a bit of blur to this stroke using the effect we've been using before. I think a value of 30 looks good. Now we need to put the layer in add mode. We duplicate the stroke again, but this time we'll reduce its thickness and blur radius. We place the stroke layers down here, and to prevent them all from starting at the same time, we'll move them slightly to the right. Well, I think it looks perfect there. We duplicate the particle layer and place it up here. For now, we're going to disable the matte alpha and also remove the opacity keyframes. This time, I want the particles to move from left to right, so I'm going to set the z-axis rotation to minus 90 degrees and increase the scale. We'll make this layer the matte alpha of the shine layer, so the particles are only visible where the light beam is. Then, we'll make this layer visible again. Look at this cool animation we're getting. We'll create an adjustment layer and apply the curves effect to give it a little contrast. We can also tweak the blue channel a bit, but not too much, just a little. I think the gradient on this shape looks too dark, so I'm going to lighten it a bit. I like it better this way, and now we have the animation finished and working perfectly. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and that you find some use for the animation techniques we've covered. If so, please give it a like so I know, and if you have any questions, leave them in the comments and we'll sort them out. See you in the next lesson.